very strongly that culture matters in a culture. And that's what I'm really going to talk about this evening, is how it matters, why it matters, and the fact that I think we can do something to manage it. Perhaps not management, but lead it. So I'm going to invite you to use your imagination. I have a few slides, and they are here, so you can see them, but I want you to imagine that you're going through these couple of stories. I'm going to start out with two stories. 1982, the Tylenol, let me see if I can get this going here. There it is. Great. 1982, the Tylenol poisonings in Chicago. And if you don't remember that, you certainly remember recently the BP Gulf oil rig explosion, April 20th, 2010. Both of these events drew huge media exposure. In fact, the media exposure for Tylenol was the largest media exposure since the assassination of JFK. I mean, it was huge. Here's some quick facts about Tylenol. It was, at that point, the best-selling pain reliever in the US. It had a 38% market share. However, some deranged individual in 1982 added cyanide into some of the capsules, and 7 people died in Chicago. Enter a PR and brand nightmare. Imagine that you're the CEO. Wall Street analysts predicted that Johnson & Johnson, who was the parent company, would not survive that. They envisioned lawsuits, they envisioned all kinds of other things. There's an immediate recall of all Tylenol products worldwide. That is a $100 million recall. That, by the way, was made by a brand manager. That was not made by the CEO. And this is important in this story, so remember that point. Very quickly, TV ads went out across the nation telling people not to use any Tylenol product. So there goes their market. They immediately crashed from 38% to 8% market share. However, they did some interesting things. They hired lots of salespeople to go out and talk to the doctors and reassure them that it was not a manufacturing or quality issue. This was a deranged individual. This was a one-off thing. They created what is now the industry standard, which is this bottle here. How many people hate those bottles that you have to peel off the plastic, and then you got to push down on the cap, and then you got to take off that foil? Well, that's called a triple seal tamper-proof bottle. Johnson & Johnson invented that within months after that accident. It became the industry standard. Even though they had a dramatic drop in market share from 38 to 8%, 6 months later the market share was back to 27%. A year later it was back up, and they are today still the leading pain reliever on the market. So let's take that example, let's contrast it for a moment with EP. The Deepwater Horizon drilling rig in the Gulf of Mexico. Fabulous, fabulous piece of technology. In 5,000 feet of water, can drill down to 30,000 feet. Incredible. It moves. It's not bolted on. It actually moves. However, the oil rig exploded. 11 people died and 17 were injured. It was the biggest oil spill in American history. The facts, however, are a little hard to come by. And one of the reasons the facts are hard to come by is everybody's sort of doing this. Still, a year later, some people say only 1,000 miles of coastline was affected. Others say 6,000. BP has set aside $20 billion for the cleanup. So far they've paid out $5 billion. Experts predict a significant brand damage from the ongoing decades of litigation that seem to be coming with that. So, bottom line, here are two PR nightmares, two disasters, but very, very, very different outcomes. Johnson & Johnson was lauded for their openness, their transparency, their swift action to prevent further deaths. They revolutionized the industry with this new packaging. James Burke, the CEO, became a corporate business hero because of the way he stood up and told the truth and talked about things. BP seems to be in the other direction, vilified in the press, certainly on the internet blogs. If you read the internet blogs about BT, none of it's good news. Tony Hayward got fired. The court cases and class action suits are predicted to last for decades. So, what's going on here? What I'm going to talk about is how to build it, scale it, and keep it. And it has a lot to do with what I call the invisible side of the organization. Things you don't see on a balance sheet that you can't raise money against, and yet make a huge impact. One of these is a culture of openness based on values. The other is a culture of secrecy based on share price. And based on those cultures, they reacted to these disasters. So my message, really quickly, is going to be culture matters big time. This is billions of dollars we're talking about. These are people's lives that we're talking about. So, what is culture? Again, I'm going to invite you to use your imagination a little bit. Think of culture as, let me get the next slide going here. Think of culture as your company's autopilot. Switch on the autopilot and it goes. And it reacts to things. It reacts to the wind and it keeps you back on track. It reacts to certain things that you can fly from London to San Francisco using that autopilot, and you can get there. However, if you want to change course, you need to reprogram the autopilot. And that's what culture's like. If you want to change your strategy, if you want to acquire, somewhere along the line you've got to get off of that autopilot and you've got to change some of the ways we do business. How do you know your culture? Well, most in this room don't know what their culture is because we're too close to it. It's called cultural myopia. You know, you can't see it. It's like you can't see your kids, but the neighbors certainly can. We're too close to it. We're a part of it. But you can find the artifacts if you look. Go around cubicles and see what's pinned up. That'll give you a really good clue. Look at the graffiti in the bathrooms. That'll give you a really good clue. Culture, ask the secretaries. Don't ask the executives. They don't know. Believe me. They know what they're supposed to say. But they really don't know what it's like working here and how things get done. Culture is the habits, the habitual ways we go about solving problems and dealing with people. So kind of keep that in mind. The habitual ways we go about solving problems. If you think back at the Johnson & Johnson example versus the BP example, they went about solving that problem in very, very, very different ways. And it was really based on culture. And we'll talk about that again. To show you just a little bit about how this works, the holy grail of a business is to get these things lined up. Strategy, structure, culture. You know where you're going. You organize so that everybody knows who does what. And you have a culture, a set of rules that facilitate you getting there. Well, that's great, but the world doesn't stand still. So what happens is something comes along. It's a new technology, it's competition, global economy shifts, regulation happens, and you need to rethink. And what you rethink is, this is the normal way people go about it. We have to rethink our strategy. And if we rethink our strategy, we probably ought to reorganize a bit. And that's where it usually stops, because we haven't quite understood that there's another element we have to work with, and that is the culture. And so we launch off with a new strategy in a organized firm, dragging an old culture behind us. And it sort of feels like an anchor. And if you've ever tried to implement it and it's not going the way it should, and it's difficult, and people aren't responding, and they're not as excited as you are about the journey, then step back and take a look and ask that question. What are some of the habitual ways of working that are getting in our way of trying to implement this new process? Culture exists whether you like it or not. It exists whether you manage it or not. It is a part of the corporate equation for success, and as we just saw, it matters big time. It can't be managed, but I do believe it can be led. So don't talk about leadership and the role of leadership in leading the culture and bringing it into alignment with. Now I'm going to go beyond your imagination and I'm going to get you involved. Is that all right? Do you mind a little involvement? All right, well, you can do this one. This is easy. If you raise your right hand and you put it, you make a circle out of your thumb and first finger. You might want to watch me here, okay? Now, shake it to the right, shake it to the left, reach way up, and bring it down on your chin. 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 How many people had it on their cheek? Yeah, because why? Because people watch their leaders. They are taking their clues from your behavior. Not just the individual, not just the CEO, but particularly what I call the leadership team processes. How you guys at the top go about running the company. And they tend to do what you do, not you say. It's just like kids, right? You tell them something and do as I say, and most kids do what? Exactly what dad does or what mom does. You watch. Organizations are shadows of their leaders. That's the good news, and that's the bad news. If Vice President A doesn't get along well with Vice President B, and you've seen it in organizations, then guess what Department A and Department B do? They don't get along very well either. And you can see those dynamics coming down. In fact, it gets multiplied as you go downwards in the organization. That kind of stuff at the top. Organizations are shadows of their leaders. Now let's return to our Tylenol and our BP example. Johnson & Johnson had a credo. Robert Wood Johnson, 1943, set down a credo. How we're going to run this company. And he had it very well spelled out. Customers first, employees second, communities third, shareholders last. They ran a pretty good company for a lot of years. Every year, all senior executives meet for 3 days to talk about the culture. It's a global organization. They bring them from all over the place. Is it still relevant? Do we need to modify anything? How are we doing? Are we getting the leverage from our culture that we need in order to do the things that our business requires of us? Now, for the life of me, I cannot visualize Lord Brown or Tony Hayward or even Fred Goodwin having those kind of meetings. It's not the culture. And so the habitual ways we deal with issues and problems and each other tends to come out in how we handle things, particularly crisis, particularly change. Now there's one other concept that I need to get you involved in, okay? I need you to experience this. And again, I need your participation. If I could ask Adam if he would help me, sure. Would you mind? This is totally unrehearsed. So stand up here. Now, what you have to do is you have to find a partner. I'm just going to ask you to, don't worry, it'll be all right. You might even learn something. Find a partner, stand up, and lock hands like this. All right? Now you can follow directions. I know you can. Come on. Follow directions. Very simple. Very simple. All right. Now. Hang on. This is fun, isn't it? No. You have to have two. You have to have two, okay? Now, this is a little exercise in which we're going to score points. Now, I score a point if I can get Ian's hand back to his shoulder. And he scores a point. He scores a point if he can get Okay, now, the object of the game is very simple. Score lots of points, ready, set, go. Before somebody gets killed, I saw two different strategies there. How many scored very few points? See your hands. Would you demonstrate your low score strategy?
Do nothing.
Ready, set, kill, right?
Sort of.
It's kind of like this. He ain't gonna score points on me. How many people scored lots of points? You two right here. Show us your strategy.
It was Scottish dancing.
Watch this. Now, again, thank you very much. Sit down. I wanted to use that to illustrate a simple point. When you're thrown into something and you're asked to do something, rather than think about it, most of us come off on autopilot again. So it's usually an us against them, or I'm going to score points and I hope you score less. Few of us have that automatic response of how do we maximize. Too many organizations are silo-focused. I think we get that from our MBA schools. Functional excellence. And you cannot maximize the strategy. You cannot move an organization through transition and change and respond by maximizing functional budgets, because you suboptimize the whole. And so what happens is, for example, here's an example. Ford of Europe, a few years ago, large company, 24 billion US revenue, 1.5 million in debt, a declining market share in Europe. A new CEO had a turnaround strategy, and what he came into was a heavy siloed organization. All the skills and all the capabilities and all the knowledge was there. They just weren't working together. They were fighting. It wasn't this. So the only way to solve that is let's get them working together first, then let's craft a strategy that can win. First year, break evens. Second year, 1 billion profit by shifting the culture at the top. That new CEO, by the way, is now the CFO for Global. He did good. He got a good job. So in closing, my message is very simple. Culture matters big time. So I have one question for you. How many in this room would right now invest in an online shoe store that intended to sell over 1,000 different brands? Now remember, shoes are very personal, aren't they? It's got to fit, it's got to look good, it's got to be cool. Zappos started in 1999, and in 10 years, 1 billion in revenue. Staggering. That's doing 100, just the math, and that's 100 million a year, just, from zero. But they chose to define themselves not as a shoe retailer, but as the king of customer service. That was their culture. And they say culture is our #1 asset. And oh, by the way, it's assets number 2, 3, 4, and 5. 3 years ago, they were bought by Amazon. I don't know what the figure was, but it was a lot. Because of the kind of culture they built, customer loyalty. So I guess my suggestion for those of you advising, investing in, or leading growth businesses, whether they're big or small, if you pay as much attention to the corporate culture as you do the balance sheet, you will be able to build it, scale it, and grow it. Thank you.